The sun was sinking behind the red cliffs when the little girl's voice cut through the dusty silence. "You need a wife, and I need a dad," she said, her small face half hidden beneath a wide, torn bonnet. The cowboy froze mid-step, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the empty road. For a heartbeat, he didn't move, his broad shoulders rising and falling with a slow breath that came from somewhere deep, like he'd forgotten what air felt like. He turned. The girl stood there clutching a ragged doll, her boots too big, her braids tangled with dust and dry wind. There was something familiar about her eyes, blue like a river that once ran through his dreams. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He'd ridden 100 miles to forget, to outrun the ghosts that still whispered her name. But now, those same eyes were staring up at him. "Where's your ma?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. The girl looked down, tracing a circle in the dirt with her boot. She went to heaven last winter." He looked away, his throat tightening. The way she said it, soft, certain, hit something inside him that hadn't been touched in years. The wind howled across the prairie, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he muttered, stepping closer. "Where you headed?" She pointed toward the horizon. "I was going that way. They said there's a ranch that hires folks sometimes. Maybe they'll let me work for food." He frowned. "You work? I can clean, wash dishes, feed chickens. Mama taught me." She looked up at him again, her chin trembling. "Please, mister, I don't got nowhere else." He rubbed his beard, staring down at her, this little slip of a girl standing brave in the middle of nowhere. Something inside him stirred, something that had been buried since the night his wife and son were taken by fever 3 winters ago. He'd built his fences high, his heart higher. But this girl's words, they'd climbed right over. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Ellie." He nodded slowly. "I'm Luke." She smiled, just a small, broken smile that seemed to light the space between them. "Hi, Luke." He sighed. "I got a ranch up north, past the ridge. Ain't much, but there's food. You can stay a few days. Just till I figure where to take you." Her eyes widened. "Really? You mean it?" He nodded, tipping his hat low to hide the flicker in his eyes. "Come on. It'll be dark soon." She followed him to his horse, a massive bay gelding that snorted softly as she approached. Luke lifted her up into the saddle with surprising gentleness, his rough hands careful as if afraid she might break. She clung to the saddle horn, her doll pressed tight against her chest. As they rode into the falling night, she leaned back against him, small and warm. He could feel her breathing, slow and steady. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't hurt. By the time they reached his ranch, stars had begun to scatter across the sky. The cabin stood sturdy and lonely under the moonlight. Luke swung down, lifted Ellie from the horse, and carried her inside. "Go on, wash up," he said, handing her a tin basin of water. "I'll fix you something to eat." She nodded, shy but grateful. Her small fingers trembled as she scrubbed her face. He cooked beans and cornbread, his back turned as he heard her whisper softly to her doll. "See, Daisy, I told you God would send someone." He froze, his hand gripping the spoon tight. Those words burned in his chest, melting something cold and hollow. When they ate, she talked, about her mama, about the little cabin they once had by the creek, about how the winter took everything. Luke just listened, his deep voice offering only small hums and quiet words. Later, that night, after she'd fallen asleep curled up under an old quilt, Luke sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Her tiny shoes sat by the door, muddy and torn. He felt the ache of old memories pressing hard against his ribs, the smell of his boy's hair after a bath, the laughter of his wife echoing in the kitchen. He had sworn he'd never let anyone close again. But life had other plans. When dawn came, he was outside splitting wood when Ellie stepped out, rubbing her eyes. She wore one of his old shirts that hung to her knees. "Mornin'," he said without looking up. "Mornin', Luke. You hungry?" She nodded. "Can I help with something first?" He stopped, turning toward her. The sight of her holding the axe handle with both hands made him chuckle. "You're too small for that, kid." She frowned. "Mama said a girl's only small, till she decides not to be." He swallowed hard, the sound of her mother's wisdom echoing through the air like a ghost. "Tell you what," he said finally, "you can help feed the chickens." Her grin lit the whole yard. Days turned to weeks. Ellie brought laughter where there had been only dust. She talked to the horses, sang to the chickens, and even made the old dog start wagging again. Luke found himself waiting for her voice each morning, listening for her tiny footsteps on the wooden floor. One evening, after supper, she climbed into his lap without asking. He stiffened at first, but she just leaned her head against his chest and whispered, "You don't talk much, Luke." He smiled faintly. "Never saw the need. But you're kind," she murmured. "Mama said kind men don't need too many words." He looked down at her, at those bright eyes staring up at him. His hand brushed her hair from her face. "Your mama was a smart woman." She was. Her eyes softened. "You'd have liked her." Something inside him broke quietly, like ice thawing in the sun. As weeks passed, people in town began to notice the change. Luke, the silent giant, now rode into town with a little girl perched in front of him. He smiled more. He even laughed sometimes. One afternoon, as they rode back from the general store, Ellie asked softly, "Luke, do you miss your wife?" He hesitated. "Every day. Do you think she'd be mad if I called you something else?" He frowned. "Like what?" She bit her lip. "Like, Dad." The world seemed to stop. The wind went still, the horse slowed to a walk, and Luke felt his heart lurch against his ribs. He stared ahead, eyes burning with something fierce and tender. "You sure about that, Ellie?" She nodded, eyes glistening. "You already feel like one." He turned his face away, hiding the tears that fell silently. "Then I reckon I'll try to be a good one." That night, he sat outside watching the stars while Ellie slept inside, her doll tucked in beside her. He thought about how life had broken him, how he'd stopped believing in second chances. Yet somehow, a little girl with dust in her hair and hope in her eyes had found her way to his door, and to his heart. The days that followed were softer. Luke taught her how to ride, how to rope, how to whistle for the horses. She taught him how to laugh again, how to pray before supper, how to listen. They fit together in ways words couldn't explain, like two lost pieces finally finding their place. One evening, rain fell hard against the windows. Ellie crawled into his lap again, trembling at the thunder. He held her close, whispering, "Ain't nothing gonna hurt you, sweetheart." "Not while I'm here." She looked up at him, tears glinting in her lashes. "Promise." He nodded. "Promise." Outside, lightning tore across the sky, but inside, by the glow of the fire, a giant cowboy held the little girl who'd healed his soul, and somewhere, far beyond the thunder, it felt like heaven smiled. The rain eased into a steady whisper that night, drumming softly against the roof. Luke sat with Ellie still in his arms, the firelight flickering across her peaceful face. He'd promised her nothing would hurt her, and for the first time, he meant it with every part of him. He stayed like that until she fell asleep, her tiny hand still gripping his shirt. Carefully, he lifted her and carried her to her small bed, tucking her in. The old quilt, patched and faded, rose and fell with her soft breaths. Luke stood there for a long time, watching her. The world outside had been cruel to her, just as it had been to him. But inside these four walls, something different had taken root. A quiet kind of peace. The next morning dawned cold and bright. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. Luke stepped out onto the porch, stretching his back as the sun painted the horizon. He turned when he heard soft footsteps behind him. Ellie came out wearing her boots backward. "Hold on there," Luke chuckled. "Those boots ain't gonna do you any good that way." She looked down, blushed, and giggled. "Guess I was sleepy." He knelt, helping her switch them. "Ain't no shame in mistakes. Just means you're learnin'." She grinned. "Then I must be learnin' a whole lot." He laughed, a deep, rough sound that startled even him. It had been so long since laughter felt easy. They spent the morning tending to the animals. Ellie followed him everywhere, feeding chickens, brushing down the horses, collecting eggs with both hands like she was holding treasure. The ranch, once heavy with silence, now hummed with life again. When she tripped and dropped a pail of feed, she gasped and looked up, waiting for a scolding. But Luke only smiled, kneeling beside her. "Spilled grain don't mean much. You okay?" She nodded, blinking back tears. "You ain't mad?" He shook his head. "Mad? Nah. Reckon there's nothing you could do to make me mad, sweetheart." She smiled through her tears and threw her arms around his neck. "I like it here, Luke. It feels safe." He swallowed hard. "That's what I aim for." That night, After supper, Ellie drew pictures by the fire, stick horses and little cabins with big suns. Luke watched her, amazed at how easily she filled the space that had once been hollow. "You draw good," he said quietly. She smiled without looking up. "Mama used to draw too. She'd draw angels, said they watched over us." He stared into the fire. "Maybe she's still watchin'." Ellie's pencil stopped. She looked up at him with those deep blue eyes that seemed to hold both sorrow and faith. "Do you think she can see me now?" Luke nodded slowly. "I reckon she can. And I think she's mighty proud." She smiled faintly, then went back to her drawing. When she finished, she held it up. It was the two of them, Luke and Ellie, standing under a bright sun, a horse beside them, and a small house behind. She handed it to him. "That's us," she said. He took it carefully, like it was something sacred. "Yeah, that's us." He pinned it to the wall above the fireplace that night. And every time he looked at it, something in him healed a little more. Spring came early that year. The hills turned green, and the creeks filled again. Luke taught Ellie how to plant beans and corn, how to mend fences, how to whistle to call the dog. She learned fast, eager for his praise, her laughter chasing away the ghosts that had long haunted his land. One afternoon, as the two worked side by side in the corral, Ellie wiped sweat from her brow and asked, "Luke, when did you learn to be so strong?" He paused, leaning on his shovel. "Guess it came from hurtin' and keepin' goin' anyway." She tilted her head. "Is that what cowboys do?" He smiled. "That's what people do, when they got something worth standin' for." Ellie thought about that for a long moment. Then she said softly, "You stand for me, don't you?" He looked down at her, so small, so full of faith, and his chest ached with pride. "Every day, sweetheart." That night, as the wind whispered through the grass, Luke sat alone on the porch while Ellie slept inside. The stars stretched endless above him. He remembered the day she'd arrived, dirty, hungry, scared, and how easily she'd slipped into his life. She'd come asking for a dad, and somehow she'd made him one again. He whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Lord, for sendin' her." Summer brought warmth and thunder. The days grew long and golden, and Ellie grew stronger. She rode her own horse now, a small mare Luke had trained gentle just for her. "Hold tight," he'd warn as she trotted around the paddock, his eyes always on her. "I got it, Luke." She'd call back, her voice bright with laughter. One day, she came galloping toward him, hair flying wild. "Did you see that?" She jumped the log. He grinned. "Reckoned she did. You're gettin' real good, Ellie." She beamed, cheeks flushed with pride. "You think someday I'll ride as good as you." He rested a hand on her shoulder. "You already do, sweetheart." That night, she fell asleep in the armchair by the fire, still clutching her riding gloves. Luke covered her with a blanket, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. He felt a strange peace in his chest, a kind he hadn't known since before loss hollowed him out. She was his second chance at love. Not the kind between man and woman, but something deeper, the kind that binds two broken souls into family. Late that summer, a storm swept across the valley. The wind howled, tearing branches and shaking the windows. Luke secured the barn, making sure the animals were safe, then ran back to the house. Inside, Ellie was crouched by the fire, holding her doll tight, eyes wide with fear. He knelt beside her. "It's just wind, sweetheart. Storm'll pass soon. But what if it don't?" She whispered. He took her hand. "Then we'll ride it out together." Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the walls. She buried her face in his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, whispering softly until the storm moved on. When it was finally quiet, Ellie looked up. "Luke, yeah, I prayed just now, that God keeps you safe too." He smiled, his voice thick. "Guess he's already done that, 'cause he sent you." The next morning, the world smelled new. The air was clean, the sky clear as glass. They stepped outside to see the ranch still standing, the fences bent but not broken. "Looks like we made it," Luke said. Ellie grinned. "Told you God listens." They spent the day repairing fences and drying blankets. Every so often, Luke caught her humming to herself, soft and content. That night, when the fire burned low, Ellie whispered, "Luke, can I ask something?" "Course. Did you ever have a dad?" He paused. "Yeah, but he wasn't much around. The land came first, always did." "Did you love him?" He sighed. Reckon I did. But love don't mean much if you don't show it. Ellie nodded solemnly. Then I'll make sure I always show it. He smiled. You already do, sweetheart. Dash dash dash. As the months passed, folks in town began to talk about Luke's change. The silent cowboy who used to keep to himself now smiled when people waved. He'd buy candies at the store for Ellie, ride with her through the main street, stop to help neighbors mend a fence or fix a wagon. Never thought I'd see the day Luke Carver had a little girl calling him Pa, old mister. Daniels chuckled one afternoon. Luke smiled faintly. Didn't reckon I'd see it either. He didn't correct them when they called her his daughter. Truth was, she was, maybe not by blood, but by everything else that mattered. One day, as they sat together by the river, Ellie tossed pebbles into the water. Luke, do you think you'll always stay here? He looked at her. You can stay as long as you want. This is home. She smiled softly. Then I think you'll stay forever. Dash dash dash. Autumn came golden and quiet. The ranch glowed with harvest colors, amber fields, rusted leaves, warm sunsets that painted everything in honey. Ellie helped gather crops, laughing when the wind tossed her hair into her face. One chilly morning, Luke found her sitting on the porch, sketching in her little notebook. What you drawin' this time? He asked. She looked up shyly. A surprise. He smiled. All right then. When she finished, she handed him the page. It was a picture of him, sitting tall on his horse, the sky wide behind him. At the bottom, in crooked letters, she'd written, "My dad." Luke stared at it, unable to speak. The words seemed to echo in his heart like a prayer. He set the paper down carefully, his eyes misting. That's the best picture I ever seen. Ellie grinned, pleased. Then you better not lose it. He chuckled, ruffling her hair. Not a chance. He pinned that one right next to the first drawing above the fireplace. Two pictures, one of how they started, and one of what they'd become. Dash dash dash. Winter rolled in again. Snow fell thick and silent, blanketing the world in white. Luke taught Ellie how to stack wood, how to keep the fire strong, how to warm the barn animals with extra straw. One evening, as snow piled high outside, Ellie curled up by the fire and asked, Luke, when you first saw me that day, did you want to keep me? He looked up from his whittling knife. Didn't think about keeping anyone back then. Just thought I'd help a lost girl for a few days. She smiled. And then what happened? He put down the knife and met her eyes. Then I realized maybe I was the one who'd been lost. She leaned against him, whispering, then I'm glad we both got found. He nodded, wrapping his arm around her small shoulders. Me too, darlin'. Me too. Dash dash dash. The years passed quietly after that. Seasons turned, the land changed colors, and Ellie grew taller. Luke built her a small room of her own, with a window facing the sunrise. He carved her a nameplate for the door, Ellie's room, and nailed it himself. When she saw it, she hugged him tight. Now it's really my home. It's been your home since the day you stepped on this porch, he said softly. Sometimes, at night, he'd stand by her doorway just to watch her sleep, her hair spread across the pillow, her doll still tucked beside her even though she was almost too old for it. He'd whisper a silent prayer, thankful that life had brought her to him. And though he still missed the family he'd lost, the ache had changed. It no longer hollowed him, it reminded him that love could grow again, even from broken things. Dash dash dash. One summer afternoon, years later, Luke watched as Ellie rode across the pasture, her hair gleaming in the sun. She was nearly grown now, strong and confident. She'd become everything he'd hoped she'd be, kind, brave, full of fire and grace. When she rode back, she dismounted with ease and ran to him, grinning. Did you see me, Pa? The word hit him like sunlight after rain. It wasn't the first time she'd said it, but it still filled him with wonder every single time. I saw you, Ellie. You were perfect. She smiled wide. You always say that. 'Cause it's always true. They stood there in the fading light, the golden hills stretching wide behind them. And for the first time since he could remember, Luke realized he wasn't afraid of time anymore. He'd found something lasting, something no storm or sorrow could steal away. He'd found his daughter, and she had found her dad.